The city was alive with its usual rush, people in suits hurrying to catch trains, coffee cups in hand, and the faint hum of street performers competing for attention on every corner. The golden sunlight reflected off glass skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the park at the heart of downtown. Beneath those shadows, however, sat a figure most passers-by ignored, a young girl with tangled hair, clothes that looked several sizes too big, and a pair of eyes that carried both exhaustion and a quiet fire. Her name was Clara. She was only 16, yet her life had already taken her through storms many adults couldn't imagine. She sat by the fountain with a cardboard sign that read, in shaky handwriting, "Hungry. We'll play piano for food." It was ironic, almost laughable to some. A homeless girl offering to play piano in a city where talent was everywhere, and stages were reserved for the privileged. People glanced at her, smirked, shook their heads, and moved on. Some even whispered loud enough for her to hear, as if she even knows how to play. But Clara didn't flinch. She clutched her worn-out backpack, inside which she carried only a few belongings, a cracked notebook filled with sheet music she'd scribbled from memory, and a photo of her late mother smiling beside an old upright piano. That piano, once the centerpiece of their small home, had been sold long ago when bills piled up and life spiraled downward. Now, Clara had nothing, except the music that lived inside her. She didn't beg for money directly. Instead, she sat beside a public piano the city had placed in the park for community art. Most ignored it, or pounded random keys for fun. Clara, however, sat there every afternoon, hands hovering over the keys but rarely touching them, because the truth was she didn't want to play for herself. She wanted someone to give her a chance, to believe in her long enough to let her prove what she could do. On this particular afternoon, the contrast around her felt even sharper. Just a few feet away, a crowd had gathered around a polished street performer in a velvet suit. He played flashy tunes on a portable keyboard, tossing his hair dramatically, his tip jar overflowing with bills. People clapped, cheered, and dropped in more money. Clara watched silently, stomach aching from hunger, while her own sign sat ignored by the crowd. Then, as the performer finished with a flourish, the audience's laughter and applause rang through the park. Clara's eyes flickered with both admiration and pain. She whispered to herself, "If only Mom could see me play. Maybe she'd remind me I still matter." The irony cut deeper when a group of teenagers walked past her. One of them pointed at her sign and laughed loudly. "Play piano for food? That's a new one. What's next? Tap dance for pizza?" They all burst out laughing as they walked away, leaving Clara staring down at her hands. But her hands, they were not ordinary. They carried years of practice from when she was just a little girl, sitting beside her mother, who had taught her Chopin lullabies before bedtime instead of fairy tales. Those fingers had absorbed melodies the way other children absorbed nursery rhymes. To Clara, music wasn't entertainment. It was survival, memory, and love. Still, the world didn't see that. To the city, she was just another homeless girl, blending into the background, invisible and unworthy of attention, and that invisibility hurt most of all. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the fountain, Clara sat a little straighter. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She brushed her hair out of her face, placed her hands softly on the cold keys of the public piano, and whispered, "For you, Mom." But just as her fingers touched the ivory, a shadow fell over her. Someone was watching, and that someone wasn't there to encourage her. That someone was about to become the reason her entire world would change. Before we dive into the rest of Clara's story, let me ask you this. Do you believe everyone deserves a chance, no matter where they come from? If your answer is yes, then hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because the story you're about to hear will remind you why kindness can change lives. The shadow that fell over Clara belonged to a man who embodied everything the city admired: wealth, charm, and polished arrogance. His name was Vincent Hale. Vincent wasn't just any street performer. He was a local celebrity, known for his flashy performances and his ability to draw massive crowds with his theatrical style. With his slick black hair, diamond-studded watch, and custom-tailored velvet suits, Vincent was the kind of man who craved attention and thrived on belittling those who threatened his spotlight. He noticed Clara sitting beside the public piano, her cardboard sign resting against the fountain. His lips curled into a smirk. Well, well, what do we have here? A little beggar who thinks she can play? Clara looked up, startled. She didn't reply, only lowered her eyes back to the keys. Vincent leaned closer, making sure his voice carried loud enough for those nearby to hear. Sweetheart, these pianos aren't for charity cases. They're for artists, real musicians. Not kids looking for a free meal. A few people chuckled awkwardly, glancing at Clara with pity. She felt her cheeks burn, but she stayed silent. Noticing the reaction, Vincent pushed further. Tell you what, why don't you pack up that little sign and go find another corner to sit in? Leave the music to those of us who know what we're doing. He tapped his diamond watch against the piano lid, as if marking his territory. The gesture was subtle, but it screamed of ownership, like he was the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of the art Clara loved most. Clara swallowed hard. For a moment, her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keys. She wanted to defend herself, to say that music wasn't about money or fame. It was about heart. But the words stuck in her throat. Vincent noticed her hesitation and laughed. What's the matter? Can't even speak up? Oh, this is rich. You think you can just sit here and people will believe you can play? Look at you. His eyes scanned her ragged clothes, the dirt smudged on her cheeks. You can't fool anyone. You belong in the shadows, not on a piano bench. The cruelty wasn't just in his words, but in the way he relished every second of the humiliation. His fans, who had followed him from his earlier performance, whispered among themselves, some laughing, some shaking their heads in agreement. Clara tightened her grip on the edge of the piano bench. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sting of injustice. Music had been her mother's gift to her, the only thing that made her feel alive. And now this arrogant man was trying to take even that away, but Vincent wasn't finished. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for Clara to hear. Listen carefully, girl. Music is for people like me, people who are destined to shine. Not for street rats who play for scraps. Do yourself a favor and disappear. With that, he straightened his jacket, turned to his audience and said loudly, Don't worry, folks. The show's not over. Let's give you some real music. He gestured dismissively at Clara, as if she were nothing more than a joke, then launched into another flashy performance on his portable keyboard. The crowd erupted in applause once again, rallying around Vincent's energy. Clara sat frozen, her hands trembling over the keys of the public piano, tears threatening to fall. She wasn't just hungry for food anymore. She was hungry for dignity, for the chance to prove that music didn't belong only to the rich, the polished, or the arrogant, and though Vincent thought he had silenced her, he had unknowingly lit the fire that would one day consume his pride. Clara sat frozen on the piano bench long after Vincent's words echoed through the park. His arrogance hurt, yes, but it also stirred something deep inside her, something she had kept buried for too long. She whispered under her breath, Mom always said, when the world laughs at you, play louder. Her fingers brushed against the keys, tentative, almost shy. The piano was slightly out of tune, some keys chipped, but Clara didn't care. To her, it wasn't just an instrument, it was a bridge to the only happy memories she had left. For a brief second, she let her fingers hover. A melody came back to her, one her mother used to hum while cooking dinner. Clara tapped the keys gently, and the sound floated through the air. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was pure. The notes carried a kind of warmth that drew the attention of a few passers-by. But just as quickly, she stopped. Fear crept back in. Vincent's laughter still rang in her ears. What if they laugh again? What if no one believes? She closed the piano lid softly, clutching her backpack to her chest. That night, Clara didn't go to a shelter or a friend's couch. She had neither. Instead, she found her usual spot behind the library, where the overhang shielded her from the wind. From her backpack, she pulled out her most treasured possession, the notebook filled with sheet music. The pages were bent, some smudged from rain, but she treated it like gold. Each page held fragments of her past, a lullaby from when she was 5, a sonata her mother had taught her at 8, a melody she had written herself at 13. She ran her fingers over the notes, remembering how her mother's voice used to say, "Clara, music is your shield. When the world is cruel, play your heart out, and you'll never lose yourself." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I can't stop," she whispered to herself. "I won't stop." The next day, Clara returned to the park. She waited until the crowds had thinned and Vincent had gone, then opened the piano again. Her hands trembled, but this time she played more than a few notes. She let herself slip into a melody, soft, slow, but full of emotion. An elderly woman walking her dog stopped nearby. She tilted her head, listening. The music was faint, but there was something undeniable in the way Clara played. The dog sat obediently, almost as if it too felt the calmness of the sound. But when Clara noticed the woman watching, she froze again. Panic surged through her chest, and she slammed the lid shut. The woman gave her a kind smile, but Clara quickly packed up and left, her heart racing. Days turned into weeks. Clara continued to play only in fragments, small bursts of melody, always cutting herself off before anyone could truly hear. She was like a bird testing its wings, but afraid to fly. What no one around her knew, however, was that Clara's skill wasn't accidental. Her mother had once been a piano teacher, giving lessons in their tiny apartment to make ends meet. From the time Clara could reach the keys, she had been learning, absorbing, practicing, memorizing. By the time she was 12, she could play pieces many adults struggled with. Her mother would beam with pride, telling her, "You have a gift, Clara. One day the world will hear you." But the world had changed too quickly. Her mother's sudden illness, the hospital bills, losing their home. Clara's dreams had collapsed in silence. The piano was sold to pay debts, and music became something she carried only in her memory. Yet despite all the pain, Clara had never truly stopped. Every park bench, every quiet night behind the library, she kept playing on imaginary keys. Her fingers would dance in the air, replaying the classics, perfecting technique no one ever saw. She wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. On a rainy afternoon, Clara sat under the park gazebo, practicing silently on her lap. Her fingers moved over invisible keys, her lips mouthing rhythms only she could hear. A group of kids passed by, giggling. "Look at her, pretending to play. What a weirdo." Clara's face flushed red, but she didn't stop, because in her mind she wasn't in the park anymore. She was back in her mother's living room, the golden afternoon sun streaming in. Her mum clapping proudly after she finished a piece. What Clara didn't know was that her persistence, her hidden training, was shaping her into something far beyond ordinary talent. She wasn't just another street player. She was carrying years of discipline, emotion, and memory that would one day silence every laugh, every cruel word. And though the world hadn't seen it yet, the stage was coming. The stage where her music would finally break free, because sometimes the greatest prodigies are not born in concert halls or expensive academies. Sometimes they're hidden in the shadows, waiting for one moment, the right moment, to let the world hear their voice. And Clara's moment was closer than anyone imagined. The morning began like any other. Grey skies, the chatter of traffic, the usual rush of people streaming through the park. But to Clara it felt different. There was a quiet electricity in the air, as though something unseen was pulling her toward the public piano. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Her stomach growled painfully, but hunger wasn't what drove her. It was something deeper, an ache in her soul that told her today she couldn't hide anymore. Clara sat at the piano and opened the lid with deliberate care, as if she were unveiling a treasure. The chipped keys glistened faintly in the morning light. She whispered to herself, "Today I play." But just as she began to settle in, Vincent appeared. He strutted across the park, his velvet suit freshly pressed, his jeweled watch flashing like a spotlight. His portable keyboard was already slung over his shoulder. He noticed Clara instantly. His smirk returned. "Oh, you again? Didn't I tell you yesterday to leave the music to the real performers?" Clara kept her eyes on the keys. Vincent raised his voice so that the forming crowd could hear. "Folks, looks like our little charity case here still thinks she can play. Should we give her a chance?" His tone was dripping with mockery, inviting laughter. Some in the crowd chuckled. Others looked curious, even skeptical. Vincent grinned. "Tell you what, why don't we make this interesting? A little performance duel. I'll play, you play. Let's see who the people choose." The challenge was clear. The crowd murmured excitedly. A few even shouted, "Yeah, let her play." Clara's chest tightened. Every instinct told her to back down to avoid humiliation. But her mother's words came rushing back. "When the world laughs at you, play louder." She took a deep breath. Her hands hovered over the keys. Then she nodded. Vincent smirked. "Perfect. Ladies first." He stepped back dramatically, folding his arms. The crowd leaned in. Clara's heart pounded like a drum. For a moment her vision blurred with fear. But then she pressed the first key. The sound was soft at first, uncertain. But as her fingers moved, the melody grew stronger. It was Chopin, a nocturne her mother had taught her when she was 9. The park filled with cascading notes, rich and emotional, unlike anything the public piano had produced before. The crowd fell silent. Conversations stopped, footsteps halted, even children stilled. The music seemed to wrap around them, pulling them into Clara's world. Her body swayed gently with the rhythm, her fingers moving faster now, confident, precise. Each note carried not just skill, but a story. Of nights spent practicing beside her mother, of hunger, of loneliness, of resilience. By the time she reached the heart of the piece, Clara was no longer afraid. She was free. Every ounce of pain she had bottled up poured into the keys, transforming into beauty. Tears welled in the eyes of several onlookers. One woman clutched her chest. A man whispered, "She's incredible." Even Vincent's smirk began to fade. When Clara finished, the park erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, even whistled. Some shouted, "Encore! Encore!" Clara sat frozen, breathing heavily, her hands still resting on the keys. For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen. But Vincent wasn't about to surrender. He stepped forward, forcing a laugh. "Not bad for a street player, but let me show you how a professional does it." He set up his portable keyboard, adjusted the volume, and launched into a bombastic piece filled with flourishes and tricks. His fingers flew across the keys, his body swayed dramatically, and he even added exaggerated facial expressions. The crowd clapped along politely, but something was missing. His performance was flashy, yes, but it lacked the soul Clara had poured into her music. People exchanged glances, whispering. When Vincent finished, he stood and bowed theatrically. Now, let's be honest, who played better? He expected cheers for himself. Instead, the crowd roared Clara's name. The girl, she's amazing." Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Vincent's jaw tightened. His smile wavered. All right, he said, trying to laugh it off. "Cute little trick." But music isn't about sob stories, it's about skill. A voice rang out from the crowd. "She has more skill in one hand than you do in both." The audience erupted in agreement. Clara felt her chest swell with emotion. She wasn't invisible anymore. The people had heard her, really heard her, but she wasn't finished. Clara placed her hands on the keys again. This time she didn't choose a classical piece. She chose one of her own compositions, something she had written in the quiet of her notebook. A song she had never shared with anyone. The melody was haunting, beautiful, unlike anything the crowd had ever heard. It rose and fell like waves, blending sadness with hope, struggle with triumph. The notes seemed to shimmer in the air, pulling listeners into a world only Clara could create. By the time she struck the final chord, the park was silent. Silent, not because they were unimpressed, but because they were breathless. Then, thunderous applause. People stood clapping and cheering. Some even pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Clara's music was spreading beyond the park, into the world. For the first time, Clara smiled through her tears. She wasn't just playing for food anymore. She was playing for her life, and she had just proven, without a shadow of doubt, that she wasn't a beggar pretending to be a pianist. She was a prodigy. What Clara didn't know was that this performance, the one she had almost walked away from, would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone who had doubted her, and for Vincent Hale, the man who mocked her. It marked the beginning of his downfall. The applause still thundered through the park, echoing off the tall buildings like rolling waves. Clara sat stunned on the piano bench, her fingers trembling over the keys. She hadn't expected this eruption of love, this validation from strangers. For so long, she had been invisible. And now, the world was finally looking at her. But in the crowd, someone else was watching, someone who hadn't clapped, wouldn't cheered. A tall man in a grey suit stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Clara with intensity. His presence commanded respect, though Clara didn't recognize him. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached the piano. Vincent smirked, mistaking the man for a fan of his. "Impressive, right? I taught her a thing or two," he said with a laugh, desperate to regain control of the narrative. The man ignored him completely. He stopped in front of Clara and spoke clearly, his voice deep and resonant. "Clara," he said, as though he had known her all along. "Do you know who I am?" Clara shook her head nervously. The man extended his hand. "My name is Alexander Grant. I am the director of the city's Philharmonic Orchestra." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised higher now, people whispering in disbelief. Clara's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Alexander's gaze softened. "I came here today to scout young talent. I was told there might be musicians worth hearing. But I never expected this." He gestured to the piano. "What you just played, it wasn't just skill. It was genius." Vincent's smirk faltered completely. "Wait a second," he cut in. "You mean her? She's just some homeless kid playing for scraps. I'm the real performer here. Look at me, look at my shows. I can bring an audience, I can—" Alexander held up a hand. "Mr. Hale, I've heard you. Flash without substance. Crowds cheer because you demand it, not because you move them." He turned back to Clara. "But you, every note you played came from the heart. That cannot be faked. That is the mark of a true artist." The crowd erupted in agreement. Someone shouted, "She's better than him by miles." Others nodded vigorously. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But I'm no one. I don't have training, I don't have a piano, I don't even—" Her voice broke. "I don't even have a home." Alexander knelt slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "And yet you play with more soul than musicians who have everything. Clara, talent like yours deserves to be nurtured. You deserve to be heard by the world." He straightened, his voice loud again. "I want you to audition for the Philharmonic Academy. Not next year, not next season, this week." The crowd gasped again. People clapped and cheered, some chanting Clara's name. Vincent's face turned pale. "This is ridiculous. She's just a girl off the street." "You can't be serious." Alexander's eyes hardened. "I have never been more serious. Music is not about wealth or appearance. It is about truth. And Clara just spoke the deepest truth I've heard in years." Clara's hands shook as she looked at the man, then at the cheering crowd. For the first time in forever, she felt something rise within her. Not fear, not hunger, but hope. This wasn't just applause. This wasn't just a kind gesture. This was an opportunity that could change everything. And as Vincent stood there, sputtering and humiliated, Clara realized something powerful. All those nights practicing on invisible keys, all those days she had doubted herself, all the tears she had shed, they had all been leading here. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "One day, Clara, the world will hear you." That day had finally come. Vincent stood frozen, his polished facade cracking under the weight of the moment. The crowd that once cheered his flashy routines now looked at him with disdain. Whispers cut through the air like daggers. Did you hear how he mocked her? He tried to keep her from playing. Arrogant fraud. He's nothing compared to that girl. The comments swirled, louder and louder, and Vincent's face flushed deep red. He tugged at his velvet collar, suddenly too hot in the suit that once made him feel untouchable. "Listen, everyone," he stammered, forcing a laugh. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was only joking with her, that's all. A bit of fun, you know. I wanted to encourage her, but the audience wasn't buying it." A woman shouted from the back, "Encourage? You told her she didn't belong here." Others murmured in agreement, shaking their heads. Alexander Grant stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Vincent Hale, you had the chance to uplift a young artist. Instead, you mocked her, belittled her, and tried to silence her voice. That is not the mark of a musician. That is the mark of a bully." The crowd erupted in applause at Alexander's words. Clara sat quietly on the piano bench, her eyes wide as she watched justice unfold. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. He turned desperately to his followers, the loyal fans who usually showered him with praise. But even they avoided his gaze now, shifting uncomfortably. A few slipped away into the dispersing crowd, leaving him alone in his shame. This is ridiculous," Vincent sputtered. "You're all turning against me for a girl who plays sad songs on an old piano." His words backfired instantly. The audience booed. Phones recorded every second of his tantrum, broadcasting his downfall for the world to see. The once admired performer was now reduced to a bitter caricature of himself. Finally, Alexander delivered the final blow. "Vincent, talent without humility is nothing, and pride without compassion is empty. Today, you lost the stage, not because Clara took it from you, but because you abandoned what true music is meant to be." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Vincent looked around, breathing heavily, but there was no saving face. He grabbed his keyboard roughly, shoving it back into its case. "Fine," he spat, his voice trembling. "Enjoy your little prodigy. Let's see how long she lasts." With that, he stormed off, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. No one followed. No one clapped. The same silence he once forced onto Clara now swallowed him whole. And for the first time, Vincent Hale, the self-proclaimed king of the street stage, walked away as nothing more than a man stripped of his arrogance. When Vincent disappeared into the shadows, the park didn't fall silent. It bloomed. The crowd surged toward Clara, their applause rising like a wave, their faces filled with awe and admiration. Phones were pointed at her from every angle, not in mockery, but in celebration. Comments flooded social media in real time. "Homeless girl stuns the city." "Real prodigy discovered on the streets." This is what music is supposed to sound like. Clara sat frozen, her fingers still resting on the keys. For years she had been invisible. Now all eyes were on her, not because of pity, not because of her sign, but because of her gift. Alexander Grant placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, the world needs to hear your music, but more importantly, you need to believe the world is ready to listen." Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you really think I belong?" Alexander's answer was firm. "Not only do you belong, you are destined for something greater than this park." The crowd cheered, echoing his words. For the first time, Clara didn't shrink away from the noise. She embraced it. Within days, the video of Clara's performance went viral. News outlets picked it up, headlines proclaiming her as the homeless prodigy. Donations poured in through online campaigns set up by strangers who wanted to see her succeed. The same people who had once walked past her without a glance now rallied behind her name. Soon, Clara stood on a stage, not the cracked pavement of a city park, but the polished wood of a grand concert hall. She wore a simple dress donated by a local boutique, her hair brushed and braided neatly, but her nervous hands still carried the weight of her past. The lights dimmed. Silence filled the hall, and then she began to play. The notes rang out stronger than ever, resonating through the air like a voice long suppressed finally speaking its truth. Each chord carried her journey, her hunger, her loneliness, her resilience, and her unshakable hope. When she finished, the audience leapt to their feet in thunderous applause. Critics who once doubted raw talent without pedigree now called her a once-in-a-generation genius. But Clara's triumph wasn't just her own. Her story sparked something bigger. Shelters across the city reported an increase in donations. People began volunteering their time to support youth who had lost their homes. Local programs started offering instruments and music lessons to underprivileged children, inspired by the idea that brilliance could come from anywhere, not just from polished schools or wealthy families. One school principal even said, "If Clara could rise from the streets to the stage, how many more prodigies are out there waiting for us to believe in them?" The ripple effect was undeniable. Clara's music wasn't just changing her life, it was changing the way society looked at those who had been ignored. On the night of her first standing ovation at the Philharmonic Academy, Clara sat backstage alone for a moment, holding the photograph of her mother. She whispered, "We made it, Mom. You were right. The world finally heard me." Her reflection in the dressing room mirror was no longer the girl with dirt-stained cheeks and a cardboard sign. She was a musician, a daughter carrying her mother's legacy, a voice for the unheard. And somewhere deep inside, Clara knew this was only the beginning, because when one person dares to believe in their gift, it doesn't just transform their own life. It lights a path for countless others still waiting in the shadows. Clara's story is more than just about a girl at a piano. It is a reminder that talent, brilliance, and beauty are not limited to the privileged, the wealthy, or the ones standing on polished stages. Sometimes the greatest voices come from the quietest corners, the ones society overlooks. For every Clara, there are countless others waiting for someone to see them, to believe in them. Not every gift shines under spotlights right away. Some gifts are hidden, buried beneath hardship, poverty, or pain. But when given a chance, those gifts can transform not only the individual, but the world around them. Vincent's downfall was not about punishment, it was about truth. Arrogance fades, but authenticity lasts. And Clara proved that true art comes not from ego, but from the heart. So the next time you see someone who looks invisible, remember, they may carry a story, a talent, or a strength greater than you can imagine. A smile, a kind word, or a simple belief could be the key that unlocks their greatness, because sometimes the smallest act of recognition can ignite the brightest flame. Moral of the story: never judge a person by their circumstances. Greatness can come from anywhere, and kindness can be the spark that changes everything. If Clara's journey touched your heart, don't let the message stop here. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration today. And if you believe in giving everyone a chance to shine, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell. Together, we can spread more stories of hope, courage, and transformation.